Parents, welcome to another episode of The Journey, a podcast intended to educate, equip, and entertain you as we talk about important issues facing our families. PCA is a Christ-centered, biblically based, and family-focused community of committed believers doing life together. We hope the information you hear on this podcast informs and inspires you to be a better parent. Welcome to The Journey.
All right, parents, welcome back to The Journey. Dan Panetti here. I've got Erin Williams, who is our upper school counselor. Welcome to the program, Erin.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Happy to be here.
And you're new to PCA, so just give me a little, right? Where were you before? What brought you to PCA?
Yeah. So this is my first year here working. My kids had been here for a year. What brought us here was a faith-centered, Christ-founded foundation of learning. And I was in Plano working for PISD. I worked at 9 campuses.
Oh, wow.
I worked in special ed doing therapy with kids kindergarten through 12th grade.
Okay.
And so I was in the special ed department just kind of helping the kids who were having a really rough time. We brought our kids here because we were looking for faith-filled education, and then I got this job by the grace of God.
Amen.
So I'm happy
so
to be
glad
here.
to have you.
Yes,
How many kids do you have?
3 kids.
Ages?
All in elementary school, pre-K4.
Oof.
2nd and 3rd.
Amen.
So, yes.
Yeah.
We are,
Now, you and I have something in common.
okay.
We have a root in the boot.
A root in the boot.
We're both Italian.
Oh, yes. We sure are.
Yes.
So we talk with our hands, and we're loud. It's really hard for me to sit right now. So,
Yeah. So on the audible part of the podcast, right, nobody will get that, right?
Yes.
But the visual part, they'll be like, oh, yeah, she's
Erin's
definitely
talking.
Italian.
Yeah, for sure.
No, but I asked you a little while ago to be on the podcast, and I just said, what's the number one issue that you're seeing with our students, right, with our families, and just kind of what are the issues that you're dealing with? And you did not hesitate.
Yeah.
You very quickly said anxiety. So let's talk about anxiety, and let's help our parents understand what kind of issue this is and what, like, some practical things that they can do to really help their students with this. And I will start this with a preface. If you had asked me about the issue of anxiety 20 years ago, okay, as a male, not knowing anything about this particular issue, I would not have thought this was a very important thing. I would not have thought very many people struggled with anxiety, right? And so it just, like, it was not on my radar at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, since coming into working at a school, paying attention more to issues that students are wrestling with, and maybe sort of awareness of mental health issues has raised, right? It seems like now this is on everybody's radar.
Yeah.
And so,
If it's not, it should be.
and what would you say to our parents, right, about when we talk about anxiety, when you talk about anxiety, when somebody's sitting in your office? And by the way, we're doing this for those who are on video. We're actually in your office because I wanted people to get a feel for your office. It's a great office. It's a very welcoming place for students to come in and sit down and talk to you. But what is it that you want parents to know about the issue of anxiety and why it is a major issue now, where maybe 20 years ago, either I wasn't paying attention and it was a major issue, or it just really wasn't on everybody's radar 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think times have changed. That's cliche, but anxiety has ramped up the prevalence. It's the number one reason people go to therapy now. It's the number one thing we're seeing with kids. It is more adolescents are anxious and depressed than there ever have been in history. So it is definitely top tier. If you talk to any therapist, that's probably their number one client that's coming in is anxious about something, or that's where it starts with. And I would say here at PCA, that's what I'm seeing the most of the students coming in is anxiety. I wrote down like the definition of anxiety so everybody knows. Clinically, the American Psychological Association defines it as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes, which is we all feel that to a certain extent.
Sure.
And physical changes meaning like eyes dilating, heart palpitating, sweating, maybe a stomach ache. And so I think, anxiety exists on a spectrum, everywhere from the anxiety that helps us get stuff done. So like,
Right. I've got a test.
I have a
tomorrow.
test. I have a
paper due.
deadline.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So like, I've got to get this done. And there's this underlying anxiety all the way to the anxiety that keeps us from doing things. So I can't go to school. I can't go to work. I can't function, and everything in between. I've been doing a lot of training on anxiety lately, and one of the trainings, this lady said something I really like, that anxiety demands certainty. I have to know what's going to happen next, and comfort. I want to be safe and comfortable. And I think to a certain extent we can control that, but we can't control. We don't know what's going to happen, and so we have to kind of raise up these kids in this world of uncertainty, and teach them the skills. Every day we come here, I don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what's going to happen. From the little bitty things like who am I going to sit with at lunch? Who's going to talk to me? Am I going to have peer issues? Is my boyfriend going to break up with me? All the way to the big things. We're in a world where we know everything that's happening all the time. And so we kind of have to.
So is that part of the greater awareness, is that students are aware of far greater things that are happening? Because, when I was in high school a long time ago, Erin, but I had the same uncertainties of the day-to-day activities,
Sure.
but I definitely didn't have the uncertainties of the global aspects.
Yeah.
So is that part of what's leading? I mean,
I
just
think,
social media and our kids having access to seeing so many things that are just beyond what I used to have access to. Does that lead to that? I think it's
one of the bigger, I think our bodies and our emotions and our minds weren't meant to take in so much information at one time. So where we were, even when I was in high school, I might have been comparing myself. Yes, I still struggled with that, and I think everyone did, to my neighbor, to my girlfriends, but I wasn't comparing myself to celebrities every day, or to people that were photoshopped. I just wasn't looking at so many different things. I didn't know what was happening across the world or out of school in California. I didn't know all of that, and now I know everything all the time. Yeah. So we talk about war, school shootings, violence, all kinds of different sexual assault, all these things that are happening all the time, and I know everything. I don't want to. Maybe I'm fearful now to walk, into school when it's dark, or sometimes I'm scared to go on walks by myself at home. It's because I know these things I didn't know before. I'm comparing myself to people. And I think not just with students, but with parents too. Okay. So I think we are kind of bogged down. We are like, oh, kids and social media, they shouldn't be on it. And it's, ruining their brains. But parents too. I mean, we're doing the same thing. We're sitting in front of this and we're seeing things, and it's, uptaking our emotions. I also think I don't know if this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but in terms of like shows like Netflix, getting on Netflix and watching show after show after show, sure. I don't think our bodies were, we used to have to like pause it and wait, or not pause it, wait until the next week, right? Episode, Sorry, right. Pausing. And we would have, but now we can just sit down and binge all of this, and it's an overload of information, an overload of emotions. And I even find myself like checking in and being like, that was like really heavy. I just watched all those shows that were really heavy. Maybe they were meant to be spaced apart. Maybe we weren't meant to see all of this. And so I think that definitely plays in to the anxiety of kids, social media, and with parents too. Yeah.
Now, every study that I've seen as far as screen time, and screen time doesn't just mean TV, right. iPads, cell phone, things like that. All of it together is every study has said that the greater the screen time, the greater the anxiety. Yeah. Just hands down, period. Yeah. So have you seen that as well? Do you talk to students about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I wrote this quote. I'm going to read it to you guys. It says, this article in The Atlantic, it said, there's not a single exception. All screen activities are linked to less happiness, and all non-screen activities are linked to more happiness. And it's obviously very simple, but it's true. Yeah. What I see with social media is a little bit of comparison and a lot of knowing where people are. Like, oh, I was supposed to be with this friend group and now they're somewhere. I know where they are. Yeah. I know where my parents said they were going to be here, but they're here. We're like watching each other.
So they don't really have the fear of missing out anymore. They actually know they've missed out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I am currently missing out.
Missing out right now.
Exactly.
Here's where all my friends are. I'm not in there.
I'm not there.
Right.
Or, the same thing, like, looking at all their friends, they posted this picture of me and I didn't like it. I'm anxious about that. Or this boy's with this girl, and it's just or I'm in a fight with someone, so I'm going to screenshot this and send it to someone else, and now we're going to get. I mean, it's just social media and screen time is. I say get rid of the phones, but I don't think anyone's going to agree with me on that. But it is definitely increasing the anxiety in kids. And again, the access to information, just like seeing these horrific videos or of things that are happening all over the world, and knowing all of that information is really, for not as much for some kids, but for a lot of kids, even little ones. I think about, obviously I work in the high school, but in the lower school and in the middle school, maybe kids that don't have phones are seeing it. We're seeing it on TV all the time too, or maybe people are showing it to them, and it's all around us all the time. Yeah. So
now, do you see a difference in, I'll ask this kind of in a way that like makes sense to me.
Sure.
In boys and girls being able to handle and deal with anxiety. Does that make sense? Like boys and girls, I think both have stressors, both have anxiety, but do you notice a difference between the genders in being able to handle and deal with things? Or is this pretty much across the board that doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl, you're struggling with it and you really don't have the tools to be able to process this?
I think they're both struggling with it. Okay. I think the subject matter is different, and I don't know that necessarily matters, but I think girls have peer-related anxiety. Okay. And I'm talking a lot about what I see here. Yep. I think girls are more peer-related. I think I see a lot more boys being like stressed about school and athletics and kind of like, more performance-based and less like relational. I think girls ruminate a little bit more on it, and
by that you mean
they have these thoughts that just
throughout the day. It just
we're going to continue to think about it. We're going to go down a black hole, and we're not going to be able to get out of it. I find that the boys that come in here and kind of let it out do really well. I'm just going to kind of like deal with it and move on. I think we see that in a lot of emotions in boys. Like, hey, I'm just going to, if we can get the boys there to talk about it, they can kind of deal with it and move on. And girls kind of sit in it a little bit more. But I think they're all dealing with it. And I think, I've seen a lot of boys come in here like that are student athletes, and they just kind of want to throw their hands up a little bit. Like I'm going to quit football or baseball or basketball, or I can't do it. And then we kind of talk about it and they can work through it. And girls just they don't really have a lot of solutions, but they want to talk about it a lot, which is just their verbal processing. Yeah. I think all kids need some more maybe solid coping skills. I think I will say what I've seen and what you'll see out there at other schools, but the way kids are coping is they are drinking, vaping, they are being promiscuous, they're, having tough relationships with their parents, doing dangerous things. They're all coping, and that's not all kids, but I think it gets to a point when kids aren't able to come in here or go to a therapist or have a safe place. They are dealing with it in other ways too, which aren't all that different than what's happening, in other schools.
Yeah.
Bad coping skills. Yeah.
Yeah. That's weighty.
Heavy.
That's And you deal with this every day, constantly. So parents, we need to be praying for Mrs. Williams.
Yes, please do.
Let's talk to the parents.
Yeah.
Because I think, one of the things that you and I talked about in preparation for this was that if you've got a young person who's wrestling with anxiety, dealing with anxiety, a lot of the times you're seeing this in the home as well. What is that you want parents to know about from that particular perspective? That if you're seeing this in young people, you're probably seeing it in parents as well.
Yeah. So when I was telling you maybe kids are coping by doing all these things, my question would be, as a parent, how are you coping?
Okay.
Right. So are you having a bad day and picking up a glass of wine? Are you having a bad day and letting it out on the family because you've had a bad day at work and you're anxious? And so, and let me just tell you, I am saying this, I'm preaching to the choir. My husband's probably laughing at home like, oh, Erin's talking about anxiety, and I have anxiety, and I'm self-aware enough to know like the things I need to do, but like I might have a bad day and be anxious and go home and let it out. Like I say to my kids, if you don't let it out in healthy ways, you're going to let it out sideways. Okay. And so we have to have these healthy coping skills.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah. From little bitties, they get it in kindergarten all the way up to people my age, like you have to be able to let it out. So instead of being anxious at work and going home and yelling at my kids because they're not picking up, maybe I can like call a friend or like go for a walk or do something.
Yeah.
In terms of, where anxiety is coming from, anxiety like has a lot to do, temperament has something to do with it with kids.
Okay.
Obviously this nature versus nurture. And the big thing that we talked about was that anxiety is learned. I was doing a little bit of research and saw this twin study, and they were saying that there's not really a genetic component. There is sometimes like a high-strung temperament, but anxiety is a learned behavior. And so if we're talking about littles in the house, if the parents are anxious, the kids might not be anxious yet, but they are in an anxious environment, so they become anxious by proxy. And then as they get older and they're seeing their parents either deal with their anxiety, everyone has it, like we said before, but how are we coping with it? Are we letting it overtake our lives? Are we projecting that anxiety on our kids? The pressures, the expectations, all of that? Or are we dealing with it in a healthy way by either saying like, hey, listen, I'm struggling with this too, and this is what I do, or are we letting it take over for us too, and then watching our kids grow up that same way? Yeah. So I think...
So what are some of the positives and negatives that we can teach our parents and our students on how to deal with anxiety? Yeah. Obviously, you've mentioned a couple already. Some of the coping mechanisms of just masking anxiety and then acting out in something inappropriate or whatever. Not healthy.
Not healthy. Right? Common, not healthy.
Yes.
Unfortunately, way too common. And again, I think for parents and teens. Another thing is avoiding things that make you anxious. I think that makes sense to parents. Well, my kid's anxious about going to the doctor, so I just want to take him to the doctor. My kid's anxious about going to school, so I just want to take him to school. Or I won't go to that park, or I won't...
Okay, so Trish and I used to have the thing where, she would normally take the kids to the doctor unless it was the day for shots. And then it was my day to take the kids to the doctor. And the kids picked up on it pretty quickly. If Dad was taking you to the doctor, you were going to get shots.
Yeah,
right?
Whoopsies.
Right, and it was always kind of the... are we going to get shots? And I'm like listen, here's the deal. I just shoot straight with my kids. Yeah. It's like, and they in the car on the way to the doctor, yelling and screaming and crying because we're going on the way to get shots. And it's just like, that really doesn't help. You're still going to get a shot.
Yep, still going to happen.
Right. But it's funny how you kind of learn those things.
Well, I think as parents, my husband does all new things. Like if it's the first day or a new thing or a doctor's appointment, I'm like, you're in charge, because I have anxiety and I think I have a pretty good handle on it, but I think it sneaks out. Yeah. And even though I'm not feeling it, it's like I know somehow they're feeling it too. They say,
they'll pick up on it.
Yeah, and I think even I was talking to someone today about it, and we were talking about different types of family issues, divorce, addiction, anxiety, and we're like, even pets can pick up on different vibrations in the home. So if you think your kids aren't picking up on what's going on, they're picking up on it. They might not be able to name it, but they're picking up on it.
Gotcha.
But some of the things we can do, so some of the negative things I think I've seen that parents are doing that aren't helpful are this parent pressure for succeeding in whatever it looks like. And that could come from a number of things. Either I think some comparison of like what we want our kids to be like versus what other kids are. Oh, so-and-so is going to this school or getting these grades or taking these classes, so I want you to as well. Or this is what I didn't do when I was a kid, so I want you to do it. Yep. And those are pretty classic examples.
Even the sibling comparison.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Why aren't you more like your brother?
Oh, my gosh,
why aren't you more like your sister?
Yeah. And in reality, we really have to these all are just individual kids that have different dreams and different goals than we, and it can be hard, but I see a lot of kids come in here that say, my mom or my dad really wants this for me, or they really get upset when I don't do this or that. And it might or might not be in line with what they want, or like, I have to get straight A's. And, I think we do need to teach our kids to work hard and to do their best, but there are these just really stringent pressures that get to these kids. And they might act like they care when they're at home, whatever, they might blow it off, but they take it in and it matters. So those things can really weigh on them. Again, I don't avoid the places that if school's a place where they feel anxiety, we can't avoid those things. We have to help teach them to sit in that discomfort of those bad feelings and figure out how to keep moving forward, because they're just going to keep avoiding things they're anxious about instead of learning the skills to keep going. If we're scared to get up in front of people and talk, avoiding it forever is going to help you through that. I think not setting limits and boundaries to keep your kids healthy And that goes into a positive thing too. But your whole job as a parent is to keep your kids safe, their mind, their body, their soul. So how do we do that? Does that mean like setting limits on social media, setting limits on how much time they're spending doing sports? That might be unpopular also, but just keep, like, you're in charge of that. You know, I think sometimes we let our kids choose all these things. It's like, actually, we're in charge of how they live their lives, so how many family dinners we have. And so I think we really have to, what is healthy for my kid?
Yeah.
What's healthy for their mind, their body, their soul?
Yeah.
And then I think the number one thing, like we talked about, because anxiety is learned, we have to deal with it as parents. Like, we're going to have it. So do we need to be in therapy? Do we need to come up with different coping skills? We have to model the behavior. And it's biblical too, like this generational sin. You know, it's like, if that's overtaking, you know, I'm not talking about the anxiety that's healthy, but if that's overtaking our lives, you know, we can continue, if we give it to our kids and they give it to their kids, but we can put a stop to it. But we have to deal with it.
Yeah.
You know, if that means.
I think one of the interesting things is I've paid more attention to anxiety as an issue, is to realize we're talking about, you know, mental health, emotions, you know, kind of the life of the mind, right? But also the importance of how the body plays into the mind.
Oh yeah.
You know, Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians 5:23 how we're body, we're soul, and we're spirit, and so all three of those are super important. But to realize that some of the big emotional triggers are actually being tired and caffeine. And I watch our kids, right, who are drinking 3 Celsius on a day,
man, yeah.
right, which is like giving you 9 cups of coffee.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I wonder why you're a little high strung. And that's, I think that's an important thing from a parent standpoint, though, as well, is what time are your kids going to bed?
Oh, for sure.
You know, and knowing that a lot of kids stay up till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're like, well, you know, they've got so much to do, and it's like, do they have too much to do?
Yeah. Oh
Right?
gosh, yeah, that is.
And so, you know, if you're 14 years old and you're living off of Celsius already,
Yeah.
right? We're not sponsored by Celsius, by the way.
Yeah, no,
just
we're
in
not.
case.
We're actually the opposite of that.
But I mean, those things, I think from a parenting standpoint, right, you've got to help your young person figure out, like, hey, if you're 14 and 15 and you're already struggling with this and you're wrestling with this and you don't sleep well and you're anxious, right? I mean, you've got to ask those questions. How can we help you do that? You know, what do we need to cut out so that we can spend more time and have some downtime, right? And I think that the Sabbath day of rest is something that, you know, again, for whatever reason, maybe sports, right, for a lot of our families, but has kind of gone away, that our kids really don't have downtime and restful time. They don't have, you know, unstressed time that, you know, you're seeing in the home. They're bringing it into the school. And it just,
and like for me, it's what's the end goal here.
Yeah.
One of a quote that I quote my husband a lot, because I think he's a far better therapist than I will ever be, I think. And he says, like, we're not trying to raise really cool high school kids.
Yeah.
You know, which I think some people get so honed into this short-term goal, and it's this athlete in high school or whatever it is about this time, and like, man, that's such a short. This is our time with them, and it is so short, and we want to raise great citizens of this world and that love Jesus and that are good people and are confident. And it's not about being a really cool high school kid. You know, I can't tell you the last time someone asked me like what my grade point average was in high school. I can't even remember the last time someone asked me where I went to college, maybe like what I got my degree in. But people, it doesn't matter after a certain amount of time. And so I think it's like, what is our end goal? What does that success look like? And what kind of pressure are we putting on our kids to do all of these things as teenagers? Being a teenager is really hard. Like, I sit with these kids and I tell them that every day. I'm like, I see that this is really hard. And I think some people just think, oh, it's just, your life is so easy and you just go to school. And it really is tough. I tell another story about, I went to an adolescent symposium. I don't know if I've told you this, but the keynote speaker was talking about teenage breakups. And her entire practice revolved around teenage breakups because they are so real and the emotions are so big and the way the brain is wired. And so the things that I'm trying to get at is the things that these kids are feeling are real and they're big and they matter. And we really have to come alongside them and coach them and let them know, like, this is real. Your anxiety is real. These feelings are real. And we're here to coach you through it and to keep you, like I said, we're in charge of your mind and your body and your soul and to keep that all healthy. And that kind of goes into the positive stuff. Like, one of the things I put at the top of the list was to simplify life. Like, we've got to stop looking around and, you know, putting busyness like on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm so busy.
Yeah.
We're so busy. We're not even home to eat dinner. We're not, it's like.
I just read a book called Crazy Busy by Kevin DeYoung.
Yeah.
Same thing, right? I mean, there's the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Great book. John
right?
Mark
Same
Comer.
thing.
Yeah.
Just right. Like you've got to have time in your calendar.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if we wrote down everything that we did on our calendar, literally,
yeah.
right, and kind of programmed it out, there's not enough time in the day to do the things that we're expected to do.
Yeah.
Right. And then we don't get it all done, and so we get anxious about it, and it rolls over to the next day, and it just goes on and on and on. And I think that's our kids pick up on that, and they have that same mentality and how they go through that. So you have to find time.
And you're teaching them how they're going to raise their families,
Yep.
right? So what
Yep.
was important to us when we were growing up, and what's important to us as they're growing up is what's going to be important to them, right? And giving them that downtime, and also their bodies, and they're like we were talking about all this nervous system, and we weren't meant to handle it all. Well, they need downtime. I mean, to reset. I've heard these kids that are like you were saying, we're doing this, I'm drinking a Celsius, I'm having a cup of coffee, I'm going to bed, I'm waking up, I'm doing it all over again.
Yeah.
One of the questions I ask all my students when they come in here is, tell me one fun thing you did today, or one fun thing you did yesterday. Because your job is to be a kid, which means going to school. It means having fun. And they're like, and sometimes they can't, and I don't mean something big, but like, did you watch a show you liked? Did you have some ice cream with a friend? Did you call a friend? Did you, I don't know, FaceTime a friend? Did you, I don't know, just anything that you deem as being fun, and they can't remember the last time maybe they did something that was fun. So I think we have to like bring that back. And again, I think that's a parent thing. Are we having fun? Are we always anxious and stressed? Are we...
Good questions.
So I think a strong biblical foundation and limits on social media, I think that's huge. I think, our God isn't a God of anxiety, and He's a God of certainty.
We could make T-shirts on that.
We should.
Right. Our God is not a God of anxiety.
It's like we know.
He's in control.
He's
not worried at all.
And if we think about, we plan our ways, but God knows our step. We have all these plans for our kids, and I just want to say, like, the plan God has for your kids, you cannot thwart that. Like, there's nothing you can do that's going to, like, change God. God, if your kid's supposed to do this or that or go to this school, they're going to go there. No matter, they might have to take the long way for some reason, but, God's plans are God's plans. And that's also where, like, we have to think about, where does faith come in? Mm-hmm. We're so anxious over all these things we can't control. And where's our foundation, which is this biblical foundation of we have faith. That God's going to do. Well,
one of the things that you said that was interesting as far as a coping mechanism, right, was talking to a friend, right? To kind of like, you've got to let it come out.
Yeah.
So the concept of prayer.
For sure.
Right? I mean, do we take these things to God? Because when Paul's writing about being anxious, he says, don't be anxious, right? But pray about everything.
Everything.
And just that reminder of God's there to listen, and God wants to know what you're anxious about and what you're stressed about and what your problems are. But I think the problem with prayer is that it's a two-way street, that if we're going to communicate to God, He wants to communicate back to us. Yeah. And part of that communication back to us is to help us with our priorities and our perspective, right? To just say, hey, Dan, I know you're worried about this, but one of the reasons you're worried about this is because, right, your perspective on it is actually incorrect, right? You think this is important when in reality it's not. It's less important than you think, right? This particular job promotion or this particular issue over here, or did my kid get this particular grade? It's like, Dan, right? Is this about your son or daughter performing well? Right, to the level of their ability, or is this about you as a parent wanting to get the, hey, look at my kid, they're an all-A student. It's like, is that about him or is it about you? Yeah. So I think those are important things. Perspective.
And I mean,
I think important.
It's about, the parent's perspective. I mean, I am the first to be like, my kids have some projects in pre-K for second and third grade, and I'm anxious about it. And so I'm not immune to this as any parent. And so, like, I have to kind of refocus, and I need people in my life to do it for me. I need good friends. I need my husband. I need to, you were saying, like, getting it out as talking to God or talking to a friend. There's a lot of research about, I'm sure there's a book called The Body Keeps a Score. It's about trauma, but anything like anxiety, depression, all these feelings do get stored in the body. And I tell kids, like you can get a stomach ache. A lot of kids get stomach aches, headaches, all these psychosomatic symptoms, and there's just letting it out, literally just talking about it, praying about it, writing about it, can alleviate a lot of that pain, because it does get actually stored up in your body. And then I'll go back to say, as a parent, what are you doing? Because if you're not doing that, then your kids aren't going to do it.
Yeah.
If you're not letting it out, if you're not praying about it, if you're not modeling those behaviors, then they're certainly not going to do it.
Yeah.
So I think all of those positive things, I think right now kids are just confused spiritually. And I think that plus being like influenced by social media can kind of bring on this destructive thinking. And I think that's where it's like, we have to be the parent to have that foundation, and those rules and regulations around social media are just what they're involved in. They need that downtime at home. They need that parent interaction. And so I think those are all things we can do as parents. I mean, I can knock off some other things, like we need to help them tolerate and normalize discomfort. I think we try to save our kids from a lot of things. I said learn by doing, failing, and succeeding. We talked about that. Handling the uncertainty of life, this just thought of resiliency, like life is uncertain. Being more flexible. I'm like the poster child for being inflexible. I used to be. And now, like, I've learned, again, you can't control everything. Where's your margin for life if things are just as they should be? And then we talked about this problem solving versus ruminating. If you're just ruminating about problems or ruminating about what could happen, sit down with someone and problem solve, work through it, talk through that. And then again, the healthy families, by spending time together, having positive communication, and then just showing affection and appreciation for each other. Just coming, like I think it was Mother Teresa that said, how do you change the world? It's like, go home and love your family. Yeah. And so like, that's kind of where it all starts.
Yeah. So 2 last questions.
Yes.
Resources, if I want to know more. And then when do I know that this is a bigger problem than just a conversation with my son or daughter, but I need to seek professional help?
Yeah, so there's a million resources. There's a million books you could read. For parents, I think one of the best books I've read is Get Out of Your Head by Jenny Allen.
Great book.
I don't know if thinking back, I don't know if it's more geared towards women. It might be, but
I read it.
Oh, you read it? Okay, great.
Thought it was great.
Great. So I think it's great. A lot of practical things in there. Obviously, it's biblically based. Yep. Lots of books out there about teens. If you have a teen struggling with anxiety, the training I just went through was with a lady named Lynn Lyons, and she has a podcast, and you can just look that up, Lynn Lyons. And so she gives a lot of really good stories and examples. Her whole practice is kids with anxiety. So she deals with it all day, every day. So that's great. I think biblically, I think you just got to be in the Bible too. I just think we have to learn to live counterculturally. Yeah. And I think all the verses that we've talked about, one of my favorites is about taking your thoughts captive. And in a different version, it says, we capture like prisoners of war every thought. And so I think sometimes these are hard concepts for teenagers to understand. But again, like if we're doing that and we're learning how to do it and using these biblical concepts in our lives, we can teach them. And so I think we got to get rid of the busyness. We got to get rid of the of striving for more, praising this version of succeeding, and really get back down to the basics. And then in terms of like what it looks like for getting help, if you're at PCA and your kid's just struggling with daily anxiety, all of our counselors are great. You can always come to me. I think where it gets clinical, where you might need help, is when you're unable to come to school, when it's intruding on your daily functioning. Like, I can't get out of bed. I can't go to school. I'm so anxious. I can't even get in the car. I can't think about school, or whatever it is. I'm just using school as an example. So when it's impeding on your daily functioning is when it's time for professional help. Okay. And I can also help with those resources.
Very good.
Yeah.
Erin, I'm glad you're here. All of our counselors, right? Upper school, middle school, lower school. We have counselors at every level. North Campus with Mrs. Dysart up there. So there are people to talk to, and you guys are here and doing a fantastic job. So thank you for that. Thank you for caring about our kids, and thank you for caring about our families. Because some of the things that you said may not have been well received and hard, right? Kind of stepped on some toes. But the reality is like this: these are home issues, right? We're partnering with parents, and parents. We want the home environment to be a safe, secure, stable environment so that our kids can be successful. And as your husband said, I love it, great counselor, right? We're not trying to raise successful high school kids. We're trying to raise godly men and women that are going to be successful in the world. And can I tell you, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of just difficulties in the world. And so this is training ground for that. And so we're going to try to do this as well as we can and prepare them for the uncertainties of the world. But at the end of the day, right, our hope and our strength, right, comes from trusting in God, not from getting the grades or having the relationship with, the boyfriend or whatever it is, right? Those things, right, we're going to place as opportunities to learn, right? We'll have some failures along the way. But we're going to be successful as we go through because we're going to trust God to be our ultimate provider and protector.
Absolutely. And we're in this together, and I love the kids, and you can't work with kids without working with adults. So, I work with these kids every day, but, my passion is for the family system because it's all in there. And so I'm thankful to be here, and I'm here if anyone needs anything.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely.
Thank you for investing the time to listen to this episode of The Journey. Please take a minute to share with friends and family who will also benefit from this valuable resource. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast app. It is truly our blessing and honor to walk with you on The Journey.